Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to talk about how to write simple, clear F# option pipelines with Option.orElseWith. So last week I shared how to get the IP address of a web request in F# Giraffe as part of my IP address voting feature for one of my new side projects. And basically it involves checking various pieces of state on the request to find one that is actually filled, and then if it finds the filled one, it wants to return that. Now this fits very nicely into a kind of option pattern as the value is either some or none. And so I built an implementation that was kind of doing that. Now when I shared this out, I got some feedback that there were more succinct patterns for pipelining optional values like these. And so in this post, we will explore Option.orElseWith, which is a useful helper for making these options pipelines and how it can make them much simpler and clearer. So first, let's start off with how Option.orElseWith works and kind of why is this useful? And so the beauty of pipelining, sometimes referred to railroading, though they're not a full overlap, it's kind of like a subset, if you will, is that we can write data flows simply and succinctly. Data basically starts at the top and then we're flowing it through our pipeline, doing transformations on this data, and then we eventually get the resulting value back after we've done these, pipelined, linked transformations. And while this ultimately can lead to more succinct code, often more explicit, robust code, because it's often doing value-based control flows rather than maybe throws or any other kind of error handling, more succinct code than standard imperative operations, this is a very different paradigm and thus can be very confusing. I've been writing F# for over 2 years now, and still some of this pipelining stuff, still some of this computation expression feels more complicated than I just want to do an early return, for example. And so an example of a common point of confusion is how to implement early returns in pipelines code. In imperative code, you'd be if condition return value, but pipelines don't quite work that way because basically the idea of a pipeline is that we're flowing all the way down to the pipeline and taking the results of that. And so it's a different way of thinking about accomplishing the same thing. Okay, and so Option.orElseWith is a method for building such a pipeline for option values. It essentially is a match statement that says, I'm piping an option into this. If the value is some, then return that some value, and so that would then flow down to the next. Or if the value is none, then run whatever function you put inside of it to get a new value out. And because it can be created in the form of option to option, so you could flow an option into it and then return an option from this, we can very easily pipeline this together to make option pipelines more succinct than writing this match statement over and over ourselves. And so I have an example on Replit if you want to play with it, and I'll go ahead and open this so we can run it and get some code highlighting. Okay, very simple program, just got a main here. We're setting a variable here, and then this variable is going to be set as, we just have a pipeline starting with an option of none. This will flow into Option.orElseWith, and then the function it will do if it gets none is sum123, and then we'll do the same thing, and this will return none to kind of show you that this never gets hit because, we had the sum, so it'll return the sum. So I'll run it just to prove that this works. So we get our output here showing that, yes, indeed, the value is sum123, and so that this is what's actually piped through. All right, so improving option pipelines with Option.orElseWith. And so the above example is pretty simple and kind of contrived. So I wanted to show some real code refactored in this form to show you how it can make real option pipelines much simpler and clearer. Okay, so we're going to start off with the first code I wrote to get this IP address for a web request. And again, what it's doing is it's checking several places where the value may or may not be set, and then we're using a few patterns. Basically, we're doing a null to option match case, and then we're doing a simple if-else early return. So I'm going to open this up in GitHub so that we can get some code highlighting, but the code is also here if you want to look at it. And so here's the code. It's just get request IP address. We're taking it into context, and then it's going to return a string option. And basically, we're checking three things where the value may or may not exist, and then each time we are converting this maybe null into an option. F# doesn't like nulls, but whenever we're interfacing with the outside world in .NET, nulls might exist, so we turn it into an option so we can use it easier. And then basically we're doing non-monadic early returns here because I find this is much simpler sometimes and is much more what I'm used to coming from a non-pipelined language. And so it's fine, but obviously we've got a lot of this kind of just conversion code, early return code, and stuff And this is where, this pipelining really comes in handy. And so the new code that I'll show you makes this pipeline much more succinct by utilizing some of these standard library helpers for options operations. And so we're using this Option.orElseWith that I explained in this post, and then Option.ofObj, which basically is that null to option match case I showed you earlier, but it's just a little bit more succinct. Also, quick shout out to Peter and Ian on Twitter for these suggestions, because they really helped. So here we are back in GitHub, and so on the left I've got, the old code that I just showed you, and then here on the right we can see the new code. And they are functionally equivalent, but instead of doing these like match cases, we're doing these of obj, and then instead of doing these early returns and then getters, we can actually just say that inside of this, or else with. And so if it's a sum, it'll just flow right through and then we'll get it back. But if it's a none, we're like, well, let's just go get a new value and see if it's there. And so, like lines of code are not a great way to talk about code quality, but I would argue that this is just as easy to read as this once you kind of know what these helpers do. And we save ourselves just like a lot of typing the same thing over and over, which can certainly help prevent any errors that you might actually make and copy pasting this kind of stuff. New code's here as well, if you want to look at it on this post. Next. So I've been building web apps with F# for the past few years now, and I'm still stumbling on new ways to do things. The kind of pipelined approach, railroading, computation expressions is just very different from other languages. And I don't use F# normally for like my main job. It's really just side projects. So I don't have much time exposure to people writing real code that is using this heavily in an easily kind of readable manner. And so I'm always stumbling on these kind of new ways to do things. And most of this is coming from y'all giving me feedback on the ways that I'm implementing things as well. So question for you is like, what's your favorite way to pipeline railroad in F#? I'd love to see kind of how you're doing this in your code, because then this will give me better ideas for how to improve mine as well. Now, if you like this post, you might also like how I got interested in F#, my journey through various different languages, things I liked, things I didn't before finding F#, and landing on it as a good balance between these things. I'd also be interested in simple interactive islands with F# and HTMX, which is kind of an entry into how I'm building a lot of my projects these days. I'm basically doing all F# SSR backend monoliths and adding dynamism, modern UX with HTMX on top. And then finally, you might be interested in 5 reasons F# is a great Python alternative for scripting, side projects, and enterprise applications. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.